Today's video is sponsored by Ridge Wallet. If you head on over to ridge.com/force from now until March 26, you can save up to 40% on any purchases. Stay tuned for later in the video to learn more. I'm pretty pumped for 2023. Like, it's shaping up to be a real good year for gaming. We've already had a few cool things, like the Dead Space remake is awesome. I've really been enjoying the Dark and Darker playtests that have taken place. For all of their faults, I liked both Wild Hearts and Sons of the Forest. And Hogwarts Legacy came out and broke all sorts of records. Beyond those, though, there's still a ton of stuff to look forward to. Very soon we get the Resident Evil 4 remake. I cannot wait for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I loved the first game. Then of course we got like Starfield and Redfall. There's Arc Raider still coming. Witchfire's awesome. For any of us MMO weirdos, there's Blue Protocol and even Wayfinder. All of that and more on top of whatever else is coming that hasn't even been announced yet. Like, there's some real great looking stuff. I'm excited for all of it. And you could just throw it all in the trash. It doesn't matter, because without question, the #1 game sitting at the top of my list is Diablo 4. Out of everything coming in 2023, this is the game that I expect to spend the most time playing. Now, I know, there's a lot of stuff to be concerned about, right? Blizzard going max monetization with a box price battle pass, cash shop, and selling an expansion down the road. It's like everything but NFTs, basically. Concerns about things like content variety or the end game replayability. And then, of course, there's the itemization and progression worries for all of us mega ARPG nerds. Pick your poison, right? Any one of these things may very well ruin Diablo 4 in the end for some of you. But today, I want to cast those concerns aside. Valid as they may be, I've made plenty of videos already covering this stuff, and I'm sure I will make more in the future. No, as hard as it sounds, today I want us to recall the fact that this is a leisure hobby meant to be enjoyed. Or in other words, gaming is supposed to be fun, yeah? And you know what? I've already played a ton of Diablo 4 through various early hands-on events, including BlizzCon back when that was still a thing, and the game is fun, like a lot of fun. So between the time that I've spent with the game and everything else we've learned and seen through previews, I'm really looking forward to the full release of Diablo 4. So today, I want to talk about why I am, and maybe you should be too, excited for Diablo 4. First and foremost, and this is probably the easiest gimme of them all, the combat and gameplay in Diablo 4 are just fantastic. Maybe unsurprisingly, as game feel is something that Blizzard has almost always done well. For everything that's changed with the company over the years, they seem to get this right more times than not. I'd even go as far as to say that even if Blizzard dropped the ball with everything else about Diablo 4, the combat is good enough to keep me playing for quite some time. Moving through the world, smashing hordes of demons, casting spells, it all looks, sounds, and feels fantastic. Now, whenever I talk about a game feeling good to play, it can kind of come across as vague. Like, what does that even mean? What does it mean for it to feel good? Let's add some specificity here, shall we? Game feel really has everything to do with the moment-to-moment satisfaction that comes from character movement and combat. Separate from any other systems, features, or progression, much of what we attribute to good-feeling gameplay really boils down to a few things. First of all, having low input latency and responsive controls, like your character responding properly and in a timely manner to your inputs. When this is even slightly delayed, it can feel awful. When it is on point, it feels super crisp. Along with that is having smooth and high quality animations for the character, the various attacks, and then how those attacks are received by targets as well as the environment. Things like accurate hit detection play a big role here as well. And actually, to that point, Blizzard has detailed some of the work they've done to ensure that the damage hitboxes match up with attack and spell animations as much as possible. So when you swing your sword, the damage is applied with the animation and not just when the animation happens. They actually showcased a few examples of how this plays out, and while it may seem like a minor thing, this sort of detail adds a ton to the feel of the gameplay experience. On top of that, they've also revamped how enemies react to being hit so that their animations will match not only the impact and type of damage that's being dealt, but also the direction that the attack comes from. And then finally, there is combat audio, the sounds that are associated with the attacks and spells, the monsters, and the world itself. This often gets overlooked, but when it is done right, it adds so much to the experience. And in Diablo 4, the sounds, they sound good. And when all of this comes together, when you've got the responsive controls, when you've got well-designed visual effects and animations, and how those animations line up with the damage that's being dealt, and then all of the associated audio, this is really what distinguishes games where attacking feels like you're swinging a wet noodle from games that we would say have solid or visceral or good feeling combat. And from what I've played so far, Diablo 4 totally has good feeling combat. Oh, and also this could be an entire section in and of itself, but I just will add this on here. Across the board, their use of dynamic animations is really cool. So they've got dynamic player skills, where as your skills get more powerful, either enhanced via the upgrades in the skill tree or from your gear, the visual effects will ramp up to correspond with that increased strength. So the level 1 version of Incinerate, for example, visually actually looks weaker compared to the max level of Incinerate. This is the case across all attacks and spells within the game, and it is a really cool system. Then there's also skill-driven deaths. This was a feature in Diablo 3, and it's making a return with some improvements here. There are basically multiple categories of death type for enemies, which trigger depending on what ability it was that killed them. So every class in the game actually has access to a handful of unique death animations that they can inflict upon enemies. So like everything else that was in this first section, it's just one more piece of the puzzle that really adds this level of detail, this attention to detail that all come together to really enhance the experience. They make playing the game, the gameplay, the feel of it all really, really good. Now, before we go on to reason number 2 as to why you should be excited, I'd like to thank today's sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by longtime sponsor of the channel, Ridge Wallet. I swear at this point I could pitch these things in my sleep. It's a real straightforward product. Ridge Wallets are designed to help streamline what you carry. They're also made of durable material, which gives them a nice weighty feel, and they've got this simple, compact design. So you carry just what you need, and it takes up less space than traditional wallets. I've been using Ridge Wallets for over a year now. They're great. I really like them. A list of features of these wallets include the ability to hold up to 12 cards, as well as having room for cash. These are offered in over 30 different colors and styles, and they also come with a lifetime warranty and a 99-day risk-free trial. Ridge also offers a range of other products, including key cases, watches, and even pens. Now, this month, Ridge has got a special 10-year anniversary sale taking place. If you use the link below or head over to ridge.com/force, from now until March 26, you can save up to 40% off any purchase. And now let's jump back into the video. So reason number 2 is the open world. I actually made an entire video dedicated to talking about D4's open world. Suffice it to say, I really like this feature of the game. You know, most ARPGs up to this point have primarily used a zone structure with their worlds broken up into like these distinct named areas that have hard loading screens between them. Well, Diablo 4 is going full open world with the entire overland being one massive, seamlessly explorable space. There are still things like phasing depending on your story progression and whether or not you've cleared certain areas, such as strongholds, and there are instances specifically for the game's dungeons. But outside of that, the whole overworld space, the whole open zones, each of the game's 5 distinct regions, they can be moved through from one to the other seamlessly without hitting a loading screen ever. And this really just adds so much to the immersion in my experience. It's definitely a big part of the reason I actually fell in love with MMOs that have done something similar. Like, for example, in WoW, when I first realized that I could walk the entire length of a continent from the southernmost point of Stranglethorn Vale all the way up to the Plague Lands, I was just blown away. Like, it makes for such an immersive, engrossing world that really, really adds to spending time in it and just makes it feel like a much more lively place. And now each of the zones in Diablo 4 are, as expected, thematically distinct. So they've talked about how as you go through these zones from one to the next, you're actually going to see natural transitions in the environment. They said if you walk from the Fractured Peaks into Howitzer, you'll come across all these waterfalls caused by snowmelt. So you're actually going to see the snow like melting away, forming into rivers and then into waterfalls, and then making its way down into this large basin that fills up Howitzer and kind of causes all of the swamp water of that area. But beyond the look and the setting, every region also brings with it a unique twist to the content inside of it. So for example, the interior of dungeons will be modeled after their location. In Skosglen, dungeons may be flooded with moss all over the place because that fits the region. Or in Kyrgyzstan, you're going to be seeing a whole lot more sand in the dungeons that you go in. Same goes for the monsters within each region. So you might find the snowy goatmen in Fractured Peaks, but you will find lightning goatmen in the dry steppes. And even there are certain monster families that are primarily tied to a single region. Like the Drown, for example, would be mainly found on the coast of Skosglen. Now, all of this like thematic and immersive stuff aside, Diablo 4's open world is full of basically everything you expect from an open world game. There will be dungeons, over 100 of them, in fact, each one with a set entrance in the world that's unique to it, and each dungeon has its own unique theme and backstory and quests that will go to it, all with these procedural elements that change the layout and enemy encounters so that no two runs through a dungeon are exactly alike. Beyond fighting monsters, you're also going to find special events in dungeons, special shrines, puzzles, and boss fights, and then dungeons are also where you go to farm the aspects, which are used to enhance your gear with legendary powers. There are public events scattered all about. These are just special objectives that multiple players can engage with. You'll see these little red rings on your mini-map. You go there, you do whatever the objective is, and you collect a reward. They've got strongholds, which are basically bigger, elaborate events tied to particular points of interest, like castles and towns. It's almost like doing a little quest chain that you just come across naturally as you find it in the world. Clearing these areas change them permanently. This will open up new content a lot of times, like a small town can appear. Maybe it unlocks a new event hub, or even sometimes one or even multiple dungeon locations. Some other stuff in the open world include things like cellars, which are these small one-room areas with some enemies to clear and mini-bosses. There are collectible resources used for the game's crafting, so you'll find things like ores, berries, and demon hearts. There are these things called the Altars of Lilith, hundreds of them in the game, and when you find them, which they are actually many of which are difficult to locate, but when you do find them, they grant you a permanent stat boost for all characters. It's an account-wide stat boost, increasing things like your strength, intelligence, and dexterity. But then there's the real big stuff, which actually leads me into reason number 3 to be excited about Diablo 4, and that is its large-scale group content. So currently this comes in 2 forms: world bosses and legion events. World bosses are exactly what you expect. These are large-scale fights in the open world against very big bosses. Now, when I played a preview last year, there was one world boss in that area. It was located on the far eastern side of the Fractured Peaks, part of the world that was clearly designed specifically for the fight. It was like this large open iced over lake with nothing else around it. So there's a warning that goes up 5 minutes prior to a boss spawning. There's a countdown timer. You go to the area, and in our instance, we saw like this massive spawning pool. And when the timer ended, out popped Ashava the Pestilent. So he's like a kind of bird-looking monstrosity. He's got a beak and a lot of spikes, these 2 large talons and what are probably wings if he had feathers, and a few different abilities, like he could jam his claw into the ground and then swoop it around in a big arc. He would leap away from the group, forcing you to get closer, but then if you did, he had like a lunge attack, or he could smash his arm directly underneath him. So you fight the boss, you try to not get one shot, and they have various health segments, and then as a lot of boss fights in games like this are, they will go through different phases as you get their health lower and lower. And I gotta say, from what I played, the sense of scale in these fights was really awesome. One reason is because they zoom the camera way back, much further than where it typically sits, and this really makes the boss feel a lot larger because your character looks a lot smaller on your screen. Now, Blizzard has said that these fights will cap out at, I believe, 12 players, so that's a decent number of people all going after one boss. And I do believe they intend to launch D4 with 4 world bosses. I know 3 have been confirmed so far, but I'm pretty sure I heard there's going to be a 4th that's just not revealed yet. But beyond boss fights, there are also what are known as legion events. Now, these are kind of like public events, but at a much larger scale. Sometimes these will just be out in the world, but other times they will be locked behind a stronghold. So again, in the preview build that we played in the Fractured Peaks, there was one stronghold called Kor Dragon. We went there, and it was like infested with these vampires. We had to clear these boils, go through a couple of phases, and once we cleared the stronghold, it opened up one of these legion events. And yeah, it's just like a much harder version of a small public event, multi-scaled, a lot of different objectives, difficult mini bosses, sometimes an actual full-on boss, and these appear to require multiple people to take on, similar to the world boss. So pretty cool stuff. 2 large-scale group content already in the game, but honestly, it feels like they're kind of just scratching the surface. And what I am most hopeful for is the potential that they could open this up and do more with it. Personally, I would love for Diablo 4 to take a note out of Lost Ark's book when it comes to their end game raiding specifically. Having this challenging content that requires big teams of players to take on, and that is a lot more than just like a DPS or a survivability check, with mechanics that require players to pay attention and not just like, hey, don't stand in the fire, you know what I mean? There's just a lot of potential to craft interesting encounters, big group content. We see it in Lost Ark, even from Blizzard's very own perspective. They've got WoW, they've designed a lot of PvE group content encounters, and I would love to see a Diablo spin on this sort of thing, or what I would refer to as like the pinnacle endgame in-game content, these longer term goals that you're working towards as you're going through the gearing up process. I would love to see it. At the moment, we know that the end game in Diablo 4 will consist primarily of running nightmare dungeons, doing the Helltide open zone farming, world bosses, and the Tree of Whispers. And I just think it'd be cool if they add more of bigger scale stuff to this list. Now on to reason number 4, and that is PvP content. You know, in any game that I've ever played that has open world PvP, that aspect of the game inevitably ends up creating some of the most memorable moments. There's just something about like the sense of danger and unpredictability of open world PvP that makes for lasting memories, honestly. And so I'm happy to know that Diablo 4 will have it. Specifically, they've got what are called the Fields of Hatred. These are designated areas of the world where PvP between players is 100% open. Anyone who steps into these zones is flagged for PvP up until they leave. Now, beyond going over there for the sake of conflict and fighting other players, there is loot, resources, and a special PvP currency. So Blizzard has stated that the gear and the loot that drops in these regions will be similar to any other endgame activity. So fans of PvP don't have to feel like they're sacrificing any of their PvE progression. And yeah, basically, in general, Fields of Hatred are going to be just like any other zone in the game in terms of its content and things to do, as well as the loot that you'll get. There will be dungeons, public events, altars of Lilith, and everything else that I mentioned, but with the extra addition of open PvP and a special currency called Seeds of Hatred. So by either killing monsters or other players in these regions, beyond whatever loot drops, you'll also collect Seeds of Hatred. The seeds themselves are useless until they are extracted into red dust. Now to do this, you have to head to these static altar locations, deposit any seeds you've collected, and this slowly begins converting it into red dust. But during this process, which takes a bit of time, there will be a zone-wide notification alerting nearby players that someone is using the altar. What this ends up doing is kind of creating this focused PvP conflict. Now, if you successfully extract the seeds into red dust, you keep the red dust for good. But if you die while carrying the seeds or while trying to convert them, other players can then steal the seeds and then turn it into red dust for themselves. And what is the red dust used for? Well, from my understanding, this is primarily going to be a means of, it's like a currency that you're going to trade in for special PvP cosmetics. Now, late last year, during an interview with some of the Diablo 4 development team, I did ask how gear and or power balancing will work in PvP zones, as in, are they going to be doing any adjustments for like player levels or their various defensive and offensive stats, etc. And their response was, it's a work in progress. So at least at the time, they weren't certain if they were going to be doing any power equalization or if it's just going to be what it is. Whatever your level, whatever your power, your strength, your gear, all that stuff. If there's someone in the game that you're just going to totally one-shot, you're going to one-shot them. Or they're balance it. They hadn't settled either way. Personally, I gotta say, I would also love if they added some form of structured PvP. In some of the early builds of Diablo 3, they had an arena mode where two teams would duke it out in a small enclosed space. I got the chance to play as myself at a BlizzCon one year, and I really enjoyed the smaller scale and the competitive nature of it. Although they did eventually remove this before D3 launched, I think largely due to them being unsure of how to best balance PvE and PvP power. I do hope it's an idea that they revisit in the future. Also, I would love if they took a stab at large-scale PvP. This could be a hoot. Like, imagine having an entire zone with two teams fighting over, I don't know, control of some towers, or trying to capture specific areas, or collecting resources to bring back to their base. There's just so much potential that could be really fun, while also fitting thematically into the Diablo universe. I mean, hey, Diablo Immortal even has a system of factions with players divided into the Shadows or the Immortals. I think something like that could be great in a non-pay-to-win Diablo game. Reason number 5 I am excited for this game is the seasonal updates. You know, with Diablo 4 being so much more heavily monetized than D3, part of their justification, beyond, you know, being a for-profit business, is that they will be using the extra revenue to fund continuous support and updates for the game. So this will come in the form of seasonal updates, which they have said they are building a dedicated team to bring us up to 4 seasons a year, each with major new features. Specifically, they have said that every season will come with fresh new gameplay features and a new quest line that reveals more of the world and story, that they would be refreshing the meta with new legendary and unique items, paragon boards, glyphs, and other features. There would be new live events, such as these invasions, where different monster families might, say, take over an entire region of the world, along with various other means of improvement, quality of life features, polish, and tuning. And yeah, they're funding all of this via a battle pass and the in-game cash shop. Now, as someone who intends to play and ideally enjoy Diablo 4, the game getting continuous new content is of course a plus, but as with any other live service game, it's really gonna just boil down to whether or not they live up to the promise of delivering worthwhile content. And yeah, they do say that this will be substantial and meaningful updates, but at the same time, I have to imagine they won't be too substantial or too meaningful. And I say that because we know they intend to sell expansions, right? So I imagine all of the biggest additions will come with those expansions. I would assume this includes things like anytime they add a new class or add a brand new zone or any other really significant feature. I have to assume that that will go in expansions because it has to justify the cost of an expansion. And I don't mean this to sound overly critical. I am just genuinely curious. Like, what updates do we expect with Seasons that will be big, but not big enough that they want to save it for an expansion instead? In any case, we at least have a rough outline of what they are hoping to do, and it does indeed sound like Seasons and D4 will be more substantial than Diablo 3, which is good for anyone looking to stick around and continuously play the game. And reason number 6 is the development team's communication. Blizzard has had a rough last few years, to put it lightly, and part of their effort to correct course has been a notable uptick in communication and interaction with the community. Ever since the game was first revealed, they've been consistently posting updates, the quarterly updates, various interviews and blog posts. They've been very, very open. During this time, they've gone as far as to even share work in progress content, which can, and in fact has, gone through major revisions, overhauls, and in some cases, we saw features that got scrapped. Transparency of this kind is something many studios shy away from in fear of any potential blowback. But hey, at this point, I mean, what's Blizzard got to lose, right? Ultimately, I do think it's great as someone who's following the game and is interested in the game. I really appreciate regular updates and news, and hopefully this is something they maintain going forward. Overall, Diablo 4, I think, is looking great. No game is perfect, and there is plenty of stuff on my list of concerns. But for this video, I just really wanted to focus on the things about the game that I am the most excited for and looking forward to, which are, it plays great, gameplay is awesome, there's a huge open world that we can seamlessly explore with tons to do, we got large scale group content, open world PvP, we're expecting seasonal updates to be substantial, and the development team has been really communicative. I can't communicate myself, which is good, which is really, really good. We got an open beta happening really soon, and then we are just a few months away from launch. It's really going to be fun. I am super looking forward to it. Diablo 4 should be a good time, right? I think so. Let me know what you think. I guess leave a comment or something. It's good for my is it called algorithm? No, it's not it. Engagement. Yeah, do my engagement stuff, please. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy.